It is January 2026. Just over 2 years ago, on December 8, 2023, the FDA approved the first CRISPR gene-editing therapy in the US for sickle cell disease. A lot of headlines called it a functional cure. But today, we're not talking about the biology. We're talking about the waiting list. Because this treatment isn't a dose. It's a pipeline. On screen, we'll keep coming back to that step-by-step path. Stem cells collected from the patient, shipped out for manufacturing, then shipped back for a transplant-style infusion. So let's look at throughput. By late 2025, nearly 300 people worldwide had been referred to authorized treatment centers to start the process. But the funnel narrows fast. Through September 30th, 2025, across sickle cell disease and transfusion-dependent beta thalassemia, about 165 people had made it through their first cell collection, and only 39 had actually been infused. Why such a steep drop-off? Because this isn't a pill you pick up at the pharmacy. The drug is a synchronized logistics job. Timed appointments, scarce manufacturing slots, and cryogenic shipping. That canister on screen? That's what delivery looks like when your medicine is living cells. From collection, it can take up to 6 months just to manufacture and test the final product before it ships back. Then comes conditioning chemotherapy and a transplant-style hospital course. On the timeline, the infusion is the short moment. The months around it are the real story. In the US, the list price for Casgevy was set at $2.2 million per patient. But the real constraint is infrastructure, specialized staff, clean workflows, and, most of all, an open transplant bed for the 4 to 6 weeks of inpatient monitoring and recovery. We have the science to edit genes. We're still building the machine that can deliver them at scale.
The biggest misconception is that this therapy starts with a simple blood draw. It doesn't. It starts with a harvest, more like a stem cell transplant collection than a lab test. And that's why you're seeing a full apheresis setup on screen.
So we aren't just filling a few vials and sending them off to a lab.
Not even close. Before we touch a line, we often have to pause disease-modifying sickle cell meds like hydroxyurea for about 8 weeks. That's a long stretch without their usual baseline therapy. It's a vulnerable window. Exactly. To lower risk, we use transfusions, often aiming to keep hemoglobin S under about 30%, without letting total hemoglobin get too high. We're trying to make the circulation as stable as possible before mobilization.
Once they're prepped, how do you actually get the stem cells out?
We mobilize them. For sickle cell disease, we use plerixafor to nudge CD34-positive stem cells out of the bone marrow and into the bloodstream, so the collection machine can actually grab them. And crucially, we avoid GCSF for mobilization in sickle cell disease. It's commonly used in other settings, but in sickle cell, it can precipitate severe complications. Then comes the machine. Like what you're looking at on screen, blood leaves the body, runs through a centrifuge that skims off the CD34 positive fraction, and everything else goes right back to the patient. It takes hours. One day can be enough, but often it's 2 consecutive days, and sometimes a third, to collect what manufacturing needs.
Does it always work on the first try?
No. This is the first big bottleneck. If the collected dose, or what manufacturing can successfully make from it, comes back short, the patient may need another mobilization and apheresis cycle. And if you need a second cycle, you can't just turn around the next day. There's typically at least a 2-week gap before you try again. So the manufacturing slot and the entire schedule can slide. And even with repeat attempts, some patients still won't collect enough to proceed. It's a biological hurdle, and when it happens, it's devastating.
That sounds incredibly stressful. You do all that prep, and you still might not get the ticket to ride.
It's high stakes. And we're not only collecting for the cure, we also collect a backup. Before conditioning, we cryopreserve a bag of unmodified rescue stem cells. If the gene-edited cells fail to engraft later, those rescue cells can be life-saving. We don't move to the next step without that parachute. Once the cells are collected, they don't just go down the hall. They get cryopreserved, packed into a monitored shipper, and handed to a chain of custody that looks more like aviation cargo than a neighborhood pharmacy. And as you see on the map, that trip can be across states, or across borders, depending on where the manufacturing slot is.
So the patient goes home, and their cells go on a trip. What exactly happens inside that facility?
This is the black box phase. The lab enriches the patient's blood stem cells, then uses a brief electrical pulse, electroporation, to deliver the CRISPR scissors and guide. The edit targets a control switch that normally keeps fetal hemoglobin turned down, so the edited cells can make more of it later. The cutting step is fast. The time sink is everything around it. Cell processing, checks on identity and sterility, potency-style testing, and making sure the batch meets release specs. It's one patient per batch. If something fails, you can lose weeks.
And how long does that take? The patient is just waiting this whole time.
It can be months. Vertex tells patients it may take up to about 6 months from collection to manufacturing and testing before the dose is released and sent back. And because this is personalized production, capacity and scheduling become the bottleneck. Once the batch clears release, it's frozen again, and the cold chain becomes the whole story. It ships in a vapor phase liquid nitrogen container and has to stay at or below minus 135 degrees Celsius. That's why the visuals focus on frost, seals, and temperature readouts.
And this arrival triggers the most dangerous decision in the protocol. We have a strict rule. Do not start the patient's conditioning chemo until the full dose is physically here, stored, and verified for that patient.
Why is that rule so strict?
Because conditioning wipes out their bone marrow. If we cross that line, and then the product is damaged or unavailable, there's no safe margin. Just emergency backup plans. So we confirm chain of custody and patient identifiers before we pass the point of no return.
And the pressure doesn't end when it arrives. The final step is the thaw. Once a vial is thawed, the clock starts. Infusion needs to be completed as soon as possible, and no more than 20 minutes after thaw.
20 minutes? That's incredibly tight for $1 million medicine.
It is. Once thawed, you have a short room temperature window, so the team runs a tight checklist. Match the patient to the carton, the vial labels, and the lot sheet. Then thaw and infuse immediately. That countdown isn't drama, it's viability. That's why I call it a supply chain challenge. The biology can be brilliant, but getting living cells from a factory back to a patient, frozen, tracked, and verified, is the operational hurdle. And if your map route is an ocean 1 week and a domestic flight the next, the standards don't change.
This is where the calendar stops being a schedule and becomes a countdown. We call it conditioning, but on the timeline you're seeing, it's really the point of no return.
When people hear conditioning, they picture training. In a transplant setting, what are we actually doing to the patient?
We're deliberately clearing out the bone marrow so the edited stem cells have space to engraft. In many of these CRISPR-edited stem cell workflows, that clearance is done with myeloablative chemotherapy, most commonly busulfan. This isn't a pill you can undo. It's intravenous chemotherapy through a central line, typically over several days, and the dosing is closely managed. Once that first dose starts, you've committed to finishing the sequence and getting cells back in.
That's why this is the strictest gate in the entire supply chain. Operationally, we do not start conditioning until the edited cells are physically on site, verified, and stored in vapor phase liquid nitrogen at or below minus 135 Celsius. And we confirm the unedited backup rescue cells are collected and ready. If something goes wrong, product compromised, delayed infusion, or engraftment failure, those rescue cells are the emergency exit.
So day zero is coming. The patient's blood counts are about to crash, and they're waiting for the infusion. What happens after the cells go in?
They enter the nadir, the bottom of the curve you're seeing on screen. For a stretch of time, their infection-fighting cells and platelets can drop to dangerously low levels. That's when everything becomes high stakes. They're often in protective isolation, masks, gowns, strict hand hygiene, and in many units, filtered air. A fever isn't watch and wait, it's an immediate workup.
And it's not just waiting. Looking at that isolation doorway, it's easy to forget the chemo side of this. What does busulfan put patients through?
It can be grueling. Mouth and throat inflammation, mucositis or stomatitis, is one of the most common problems in these transplant-style regimens, and in published trial summaries, it shows up in roughly half of patients. Eating, swallowing, even speaking can become painful. There are also long-term consequences we have to address up front. Busulfan is an alkylating chemotherapy, and it can damage ovaries or testes, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. So fertility preservation has to be discussed before the first dose.
Are there risks to organs themselves?
Yes, one we watch closely is hepatic sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, also called veno-occlusive disease, or VOD. It's uncommon, but it's serious. Small vessels in the liver get injured and blocked. Most patients don't experience it, and many cases can be treated. But severe VOD can spiral into multi-organ failure. Late in 2025, updated pediatric data for a CRISPR-edited therapy program reported a death in the setting of severe VOD after busulfan conditioning. It's a stark reminder. The edit may be precise, but the pathway still relies on heavy medicine.
So how long does this limbo last? When do they know it worked?
We're watching for engraftment, when those infused stem cells take hold in the marrow and start rebuilding the blood system. In published trial reports for CRISPR-edited stem cell therapies, neutrophil recovery is typically around the high 20s in days, and platelets often follow later, commonly in the mid-30s to 40s. So yes, it can be weeks in that room, waiting for the curve to turn upward.
We know the biology can work, but right now these are still boutique procedures measured in small numbers, not the thousands of people who could benefit. So the 2026 question is simple. How do we scale a cure?
First, manufacturing slots. You can't treat patients if you can't make product on schedule, and the industry is adding capacity. Vertex, for example, has said it expects to begin manufacturing Casgevy in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, as part of ramping supply. You can see that Portsmouth call-out on the map. Second, delivery sites. It's not just a hospital, it's a specialized center with transplant-grade teams and workflows. By early May 2025, Vertex reported activating more than 65 authorized treatment centers globally for Casgevy. Progress, but still not a mass-market footprint.
More capacity helps, but the real ceiling is conditioning chemo. With current approaches, often myeloablative busulfan, patients need transplant-level inpatient care and strict infection precautions. The post-infusion recovery is commonly measured in weeks, not days, which physically limits throughput. That's why next-generation conditioning matters so much. The idea is targeted conditioning, often discussed as antibody-based approaches that could clear space in the marrow with less collateral damage, potentially shortening hospitalization and widening who can safely get treated.
Is that available now?
Not yet. It's still investigational. So for now, Scaling means making the current pathway run smoothly. Referrals, staffing, bed planning, and, the part everyone dreads, payment approval.
Exactly. These are million-dollar therapies, and the financing is part of the bottleneck. In the US, CMS launched the Cell and Gene Therapy Access Model to help Medicaid programs pay for sickle cell gene therapies through outcomes-based agreements. In July 2025, CMS announced that 33 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico, would participate. The basic experiment: tie a portion of payment to real-world outcomes, with rebates if a therapy doesn't deliver, so more patients can actually get to yes.
So the roadmap is clear. Expand manufacturing, expand treatment center capacity, and modernize how we pay, while the science works to make conditioning gentler. It's not an overnight revolution. It's an infrastructure build. But for the first time, the cure isn't just a breakthrough in a lab. It's a system we can scale.